Okay, yes, again, so hello everyone. We're just going to wait a very short while longer for some more people to join, but in a couple of minutes we'll get started with our AMA with football journalist and La Liga expert, football expert in general, Graham Hunter. So yeah, we'll just give it a couple more minutes and we will start cracking on. Thank you again, Graham, for joining us.
A pleasure. After a couple of days touring Manchester and London to meet film production companies, I'm back here in beautiful sunny Barcelona, albeit that it's quite chilly today. Looking out my window, seeing a lovely blue sky. We said we'd start at 3 p.m. Mediterranean time, so we're 3 minutes off that, so waiting's not a problem for me. But on this, my debut, chatting to Matchday on Discord, I'm naturally keen and impatient to get going and share my knowledge of Spanish football or of Leo Messi with all of you that are there. It's odd that we're on this medium where I can't hear from you. I hope you'll send in questions. I'll be thrilled to answer them. And I'm pleased about the invite from Sean and from Josh to watch Matchday and see what it's like and chat to all of you.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, if you do have any question, guys, you can either raise your hand to speak or you can drop a message in the Matchday Stage chat channel. Graham's got some amazing stories to tell and, you know, lots of really cool stuff to tell us. So any questions or all that you have, please do tell us. I think we could probably kick off now and people will start to wander in as we go. If you're all happy with that, Graham?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, perfect. So, as you mentioned before, you were, I think we spoke yesterday and you said that in the last few days you've been around speaking to Sergio Ramos in Paris.
Right,
you spoke to Luis Enrique and you're based in Barcelona. I mean, do you have the best job in the world? Because it certainly sounds like you do.
Yeah, listen, I don't know if people have tuned in here about me rather than about Messi, but the truth is that from the very first point when people began to ask me, what do you want to do? I had always said, even at school, I want to be a journalist. It was clear as I grew up that not only did I love football, but gradually as I started explaining to people older than me what I'd seen when I went to watch my local club, it seemed that I could understand football reasonably well. Now I've been football journalist since the late 80s. I've been in Barcelona since 2002. It does often feel like the best job in the world. It's demanding. Sometimes it can be extremely long hours as a freelance. It's not particularly well paid. But in terms of the experiences that I've had, in terms of the knowledge that I've gained, the way in which people in football who were my idols have become friends, and people who will advise me or will sometimes come looking to me for advice, it's beyond just a dream job. Occasionally, it makes you feel that sometimes it's hard to understand all this happened. But yeah, flying across to Sergio Ramos and being treated like a long lost friend and being given an interview that was just tip-top sparkling. Lunching twice now with Luis Enrique, trying to set up a project with him, being in meetings with Amazon and Netflix and other companies over the last couple of days, explaining to them what our future filming ideas are. Given that the company that I work with, Zoom, we released Take the Ball, Pass the Ball, which converted my book on Football Club Barcelona in the Pep Guardiola era into a film with Universal Studios. And the most recent film we've completed is El Phenomenal, Ronaldo Nazario, which you could see on DAZN or the BBC or Global. We're anxious to get going and make our next project, and one day, who knows, Sean, one of the ideas that we'd love to treat and film would be Leo Messi himself.
Yeah, I mean, that's the elephant in the room here. You've told me that you've spoken to Leo Messi throughout his career, so yes. I think all our audience would just love to hear anything from the other side you can tell us about him, because I mean, he is the big one, obviously.
What do you want to know?
Well, so I guess one of the ones that I've wondered is, like, is there any, you know, obviously you said you've spoken to him throughout his career, you know, from his younger days,
I I would say that I've interviewed him
Mm.
in various different ways. Sometimes seated at great length, sometimes in the media flash zone after a big match. Once out at the Formula One racing circuit, Montmello near Barcelona,
Oh, wow.
where he was kind enough to say, "Yeah, I'll do a post-match interview." When he was stuck in just random doping test, wasn't allowed to leave the medical control room, so we stood at the door, and he said, "Yeah, I'll chit chat away." He's still in his sort of t-shirt and towel wrapped around him as if he was coming away from the beach, and we had a chat there. It's been well, the first time I interviewed him would have been 2006. The first time I watched Leo Messi was for Barca B in autumn 2003, and I consider really fortunate to have been able to watch him reacting to questions, to watch him occasionally look at me with that sort of half smile in his face. He's consistently got a little quizzical, amused look in his face, as if there's a different soundtrack playing in his brain to everybody else's. And I love that when he looks at you with that sort of smiling, quizzical face, which is weighing you up all the time, but also it betrays his sense of impish humour too.
Yeah, I was going to ask, like, obviously, you know, the amount you've seen him, you must get to see a different side of him to what the rest of the world can see. Is there anything about him that you think maybe people on the outside wouldn't necessarily know? Like you mentioned, that sense of humor and that kind of thing.
I think one of the things, a couple of things stand out. There was one time I was interviewing him after a Barcelona game at Camp Nou, and he'd taken and scored a penalty. And when you go to speak to somebody after a game, one-on-one, not in a crowd, not trying to stop them in a mixed zone, but you know you're going to be standing there for 5 or 6 minutes talking to them. It's post-match. The adrenaline is still raging in their brain and in their the physical system that makes them great. They'll have everybody who's played sport will remember that when you come off pitch, your brain is not focused on wider things. You're still mulling over what happened. What did I wish had happened? What went wrong? Who didn't pass me? When was the referee wrong? Have we won? Have we not? What did the manager say? He is. I was thinking about how during the rest of the game he'd been leaping around, filling the goal, saving everything, and that was dominating my mind. And quite often when you're interacting with a superstar manager or a superstar player, you breathlessly move on to the next question. But I was genuinely stunned that Leo Messi, whose brilliance, his technical brilliance with the ball, is one part of his makeup, because we can all talk about his vision or his dribbling or the number of goals he scores latterly, how good a captain he's become. But that Leo Messi from 11 metres out against the goalkeeper, who was giant and seemed to fill the goals, although he scored in the end, it was an intimidating factor. It helps us understand more how brilliant some of the things he does are, because if you can extrapolate from that, then when we see him making a visionary pass where we haven't been able to see the passing line between two players and in the path of a running companion who was 15 metres in a different place before you play the pass, it is as difficult. It looks as difficult. It looks as impossible to even Leo Messi, yet he still pulls these things off all the time. So I was forced to reflect on that. There was one time when we were working around Leo's sponsors, and there was a book launch day at Montmello in 2010, and I did the interview. The room was a closed off room, seated, cameras and lighting involved. There were too many people there, sponsors, representatives, people from the organisation I was working from. The room was too small. It was there were too many people listening. I think it inhibited Leo a little bit in terms of how we wanted to speak. It wasn't the best situation, but we got a decent interview out of it. We left the room. I thanked him, shook hands with him, went out, and I was doing a live television broadcast down in the paddock from Montmello, and it so happened that he and David Villa, went down to the paddock and, unbeknownst to Barcelona, Football Club Barcelona, certainly unbeknownst to the Argentinian FA, just before the World Cup in 2010, they'd been offered, Montmello was being used for testing that day, and there was an F1 car with a side pod in it so that you could have an F1 driver or test driver. And effectively, if they were a small athletic person, you could have a passenger in an F1 car.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And let's be clear, it's 12, nearly 13 years ago now, so there'll be no repercussions. But that was distinctly against what footballers are contractually allowed to do. We can all understand the temptation of whizzing around a Formula One track in a car that's doing 230 kilometers per hour. But nonetheless, I watched with interest as first Leo and then David Villa, did this and came back. As they got out of the side pod, their faces were green, their legs were wobbly. And while I'm certain that it's an experience that they wouldn't trade, in that moment, I watched the faces and I think I saw their heads going, why did I do that? That's faster than I really fancy. And again, there was one time when absolutely nothing to do with me. The interview was fixed up with Football Club Barcelona in one of their TV studio rooms. And Leo came and he was clearly having one of those days where he wasn't particularly happy. Something was wrong. And the press officer came and very gently said, look, would you mind waiting maybe half an hour, 40 minutes? Yeah, of course. No problem at all. And at that stage, they did manage to persuade, they managed to persuade him to come along, and he came in. It just patently something, as will happen on a training ground day many times to many players during a season. Whatever it was, there was a dark cloud over his head. And I thought, right, I'm going to be careful here. I'm going to change the tone of the interview, and I'm going to make it my objective that by the end of this interview, he is smiling, that we get a laugh. That's one of the questions. That my interview doesn't treat him as if I don't care that he's a human being who's had a bad morning. And I think that's one of the traits I've tried to use as a journalist. There are many in my profession, and there are many fans too, who seem to think that footballers are just commodities, and they're not. Now, I know I'm talking on a site where people will trade cards and trade players. Their images, that's fine. They're using them in fantasy football, that's fine. But when you meet them in the flesh, they're human beings. They have bad days. And therefore, I tailored my interview very specifically to try and get us onto themes that I know he enjoys. It worked. And by the end of the interview, he left. I'm not going to say that everything that had been going on just previously disappeared, but he left in a really good humour. And I felt that was a way of getting content where people could see Leo Messi noticeably thawing and warming up during an interview, which I think viewers find interesting, but also felt I paid him a little bit of respect by just accepting that occasionally when a footballer has an appointment to do something outside his football day, training, playing, physio, people need to treat him with respect. So that was my gesture. And really, with all the things I've seen and done with him, I could go on, but I have found him to be an originally relatively shy guy who, when I was speaking to him, and he was very, very young, his way of expressing himself and the Argentinian accent and the Spanish, and the fact that I was, in those days, relatively new to Spain, meant that I had to tape it and go and get an Argentinian neighbor to help me just figure out a phrase or two and a word or two. I now watch a man who genuinely often really enjoys talking to people he trusts. And I think that clearly maturing, becoming a father, becoming an excellent captain has meant that broadly he's beginning to understand very much indeed what the broadcast industry likes to hear from him, what type of anecdotes, I think he's become very frank and honest, hugely more confident. And honestly, I've enjoyed watching that process.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I think when you say like commodities as well, I think even with like Messi, I think a lot of people almost view him as like a god or something, and they think, they forget that he is a human being and he's, just like the rest of us. When you were saying then about speaking with themes that he enjoys and trying to improve his mood a bit, have you found that there are sort of certain themes and topics he will prefer to talk about over others, for example?
I think it's really key in instances like that, or whether you're talking to David Villa or Sergio Ramos or Iker Casillas or Xavi, plus substitute any nationality, any world famous footballer. Don't bore them. Don't ask them stupid questions. Don't try and lead them into questions where you very evidently simply want to get headline and to get fame for yourself. I think that many journalists forget that interviews are two-sided, that they're participative, and that the person who is on the other side of the microphone will judge you by what you're asking, how you use the opportunity to speak to them, and therefore, whenever I've spoken to Leo Messi, so for example, there was one year when Barcelona had given him extra time off training in order that he should be particularly ready for a long season. They'd allowed him to go to Patagonia, to Bariloche, which is a ski resort. And I have no idea whether he did or didn't toboggan or ski. I doubt very much. He was relatively young at the time. But it was a rite of passage that many people, when they finish high school in Argentina, go to Bariloche. And because of his career, he hadn't been able to. So in this instance, they gave him time off to go with his pals when the rest of the squad were training hard in midsummer in Barcelona. And it was a tactic to reward him, to give him space and time to get ready for what would be a big season. And I was really, really curious about what he did, how he enjoyed it, what that ritual was. And I think if you can, to answer your question, Sean, when I ask Leo something, I try and not make it the thing I've heard other people ask him 1,000 times.
Yeah.
Occasionally, that's not possible. If a superstar like him, particularly when he's a captain, is involved in the midst of a very heated debate about something that did or didn't happen when it should have done, about the way that a colleague or a match was treated by a referee, or when your biggest rivals, whether it be in the Champions League and it's from any nation, or whether it's in La Liga and it's Real Madrid, when somebody in the other camp has said something about you, sent a message to you in the media, sometimes then you have to go straight to the hard-nosed news story and ask it directly. But also, one of the things you have to do if you're a responsible football journalist is ignore the rubbish. I was going to say some stronger word related to excrement that many in the
Thank you for censoring
in self-censoring social media or in the sensationalist press will pry into private lives, will make stories up. One, as a reader, as a consumer, I hate that. I despise that. Two, as a football journalist, I will not let that pollute the opportunities I've got to speak to leading footballers or coaches and try to say, well, now that I've got this opportunity in front of you, I just want to ask you about this thing that's been said. No chance. And I want these people to feel as if they are treated with respect, and that the opportunity they give us to speak is something that they. I'd prefer that they enjoy it, but if it's not and it's possible to make it an enjoyable subject, that they come out of the experience feeling respect for the person that asked them the questions, so that when the opportunity to choose to speak to that person or not again comes up in the future, they go, yeah, I'm going to do that. So that's the way in which I treat these opportunities, Sean. Show respect. Don't bore your subject. Don't bore the person you're speaking to. And thirdly, don't let the rubbish that goes on around superstar football people now pollute what you want to know about genuinely their career, their week, their team, their skills, their ambitions. You keep that extremely separate, and so far, I know I managed to do that.
Yeah, no, that's great to hear, and very good advice. I'll make sure I try not to bore you, hopefully, during this
No
session.
chance. No chance.
So, did you speak to Leo Messi around or shortly after the time he moved to PSG? I was just wondering if you had, like, because obviously that was a huge. I don't think anyone really saw that coming. I was wondering how you sort of received that from your perspective, and if you had any communication with that.
Yeah, no, with his camp, yes. With him directly, no, because at the last time that I had interviewed him at Football Club Barcelona, there was an absolute clear expectation that his contract would be renewed, irrespective of the financial difficulties, that it was imperative, A, for the team's development to retain Leo Messi, and B, to show him the respect that he merited, that enormous efforts would be made to keep him. At that point, Leo had moved into a phase where, or I think he's still at, where there were 2 or 3 media outlets in Argentina, particularly TYC, where I think he genuinely trusts and respects the people he speaks to and enjoys it also. And therefore, the last time that I had an opportunity to listen to him live or pose a question was in that press conference where he said goodbye. I found it not only extremely moving, because given that I'd been working in or around that club for as long as he'd been a first team footballer, I felt that he'd been treated with an extraordinary lack of respect. I felt that, honestly, I think that he and his family and his representatives had been duped a little bit. And I found that even though modern football particularly is ruthless, it's hard to trust people. I absolutely disagreed with the manner in which he'd had it indicated directly to him from the president that there would be a new contract, that he'd be renewed. That when he arrived to speak to Laporta, there then not only wasn't, but it was a complete 180-degree turn. And while Leo has flourished, so you must view all of this with retrospect, as well as what you asked me about my feelings and my judgment of the time. My assessment has to develop via the fact that Leo has gone to Paris Saint-Germain and won trophies. I would estimate that if there's a bit of a click pretty imminently, that they can knock out Bayern and become good favourites to win the Champions League for the first time in that club's history. It's clearly not a simple task, certainly because Bayern are a thorny rival. There have been, various versions of what is now an emerging classical match in European terms between Bayern and PSG recently. Mbappe's a problem. Sergio Ramos had a problem at the weekend in the last game. Coming off, the Champions League is always a brutal test. But retrospectively, Leo's time at Paris Saint-Germain helped condition him for the professional shape he was in at Qatar, and how he was able to lift the World Cup. And therefore, what seemed in the moment to be wholly negative, and in my view, wholly wrong, in the way that he was not allowed to leave, but pushed out the door at Football Club Barcelona, can now be reviewed and looked at retrospectively as still, in my feelings, the wrong manner. But the product has been good. He's won domestic trophies with Paris Saint-Germain. And it's clear that there's a possibility, at least, of him renewing at the end of the season. We'll see. I don't know what will happen. But his time at Paris Saint-Germain has patently been on an upward curve in terms of an understanding of the new culture, the different climate, his family being able to adapt more than the pain they felt at originally being, removed from their Mediterranean lifestyle, to a point whereby being at Paris Saint-Germain unquestionably helped him be in the right mental and physical shape to inspire Argentina to lift the World Cup. And personally, when that happened, I was just ecstatic for him.
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine, having followed him as close as you have for his career, that must have been a really, really special moment. We've got a question from one of our users. We've got Madic, who is based in Argentina. Thank you, Madic, for getting involved. But he's asked, on the subject of Messi's future, do you think there's a desire, or does he ever talk about wanting to spend some time playing in Argentina before he retires?
Hola, buenos días, Manic. It's really clear that right from day one, Leo's respect for, passion for Newell's has been something that was fundamental in how he began. My memory is that his dad Jorge took him to watch Newell's on one of the few occasions when they could see Diego Maradona in those famous shirts. There was a really big narrative managed at the beginning of his career, how he often said as a young man that he'd quite like to finish his career at Newell's in Rosario. I think we all need to be honest about two things. One, I'm not certain that even as brilliant a sportsman and brilliant a footballer as Leo is, that he or his family would necessarily have thought that the advancement in football, recuperation, rehabilitation, fitness, diet, medicine, would allow him to consider to still be playing football perhaps at 40. That I think now is at least a prospect. It's at least feasible. And therefore, Maric, what are we considering the latter years of his career? Which years will those be? Right now, one of the frontline clubs in world football, Paris Saint-Germain, are extremely keen to renew his contract, which ends this summer. And one of the things that I would say is that as a romantic, to see him back in Rosario playing for Newell's is an extremely attractive prospect. If you want me to estimate, and it would only be an estimate, I still do genuinely see him becoming a part investor in Inter Miami, eventually playing at Inter Miami. My question, like yours, would be when? Because whether he came to play in MLS or whether he came back to play in Argentina, whether it's about geography or whether it's about promotion or whether it's about finances, the very hard fact is that the front line of world football remains in Europe in terms of standards, wages, sponsor rewards, and in terms of the way in which the quality of football you're playing against prepares you for international football. Now, again, I'm guessing here, Maric, I'm extrapolating. But if Leo has an intention to even keep considering whether he should be playing for the Albiceleste in the next World Cup to be held in the States and Canada and Mexico, there are many questions about where best to prepare. Best to stay in Europe, best to hone yourself against the most demanding players and stay at the peak of your career. Best to go home and face the absolute tumult of interest and demand around you if you arrive back to play in Rosario to take on the big dogs of Argentinian football, or whether to go to the MLS and play in a very athletic league, in a league where the quality is improving, but nonetheless a league which is not yet really anything close to the level of the Champions League, for example, and the elite leagues in Europe. What's the best way to prepare for that World Cup? Does Leo genuinely believe there's a possibility that he might play in that one again? There's clearly a demand. Clearly, if he were to be able to keep this level or at around this level for another 4 years, then he should be thinking about it. Maric, again, if Paris Saint-Germain do win the Champions League this season, does that scratch an itch whereby he can then say, you know, I've won the Champions League in two different clubs in two different countries. That's sufficient. It's time for a new adventure now. Say, for example, at Inter Miami. Like, although I think I have sufficient knowledge to be able to estimate really well, Maric, to some extent, I'm left guessing, and I think that's because it's a live question. I don't think there's a set policy. I think that when you're leaving a club like Paris Saint-Germain, or potentially leaving a club like Paris Saint-Germain, and then potentially leaving elite European football, I think that the experience of how things ended at Barcelona will change his mind very keenly about being slow to lose that which he loves, which is elite European football. So, personally, I think we might see him playing a little bit more elite European football and then potentially moving to Miami.
I'm going to put you on the spot here, Graham. You might not thank me for it, but in your mind, where do you think Messi will be playing next season?
It's a guess, Paris Saint-Germain.
Okay.
Not categorically. And if you're asking me, is he going back to Football Club Barcelona? I genuinely think that the beauty of that for him and for the club, and to try to erase the totally injudicious, totally disrespectful way that his career at Football Club Barcelona was brought to an end, the beauty of trying to erase that memory would be sensational. Barcelona's financial position isn't in good enough shape to re-employ him, I don't think. They're going to be playing at Montjuic, the Olympic Stadium at the top of Montjuic Hill in Barcelona, not at the Camp Nou. I think there's a disincentive for Leo Messi to return. I think that it's very, very hard to understand how Barcelona would finance it within the financial fair play regulations of La Liga. And therefore, while I have no intention of moving to Paris professionally, so for professional reasons, the fact that Spain is my base and the city I've chosen is Barcelona, I'd be entranced to see this next stage of his career here on my doorstep. I wish it were so. I don't think it's going to be so. And I think that if you wanted me to project, I would say that I think that about 60-40 would be the way I would assess the possibility of him renewing at Paris Saint-Germain.
Okay, thank you. And I'm glad you... the question basically was, do you think he'll end up back at Barca? So thank you for reading between the lines on that one. We've got, if we move away from Messi for we had about Pep Guardiola. He's someone you've spoken to in the past, and Joanne points out that he's someone who loves talking about football, but doesn't do many interviews. And he's just wondering how you managed to arrange that, and what was it like talking to him in that environment?
No, if I'm talking to, is it Juan?
Yeah. Yes. Was not Joanne.
Spelt?
Joan.
Joanne. Nicely done, Sean. Joanne, there's a whole host of different ways. The first time I ever spoke to him, it was at a time when he was changing sponsors, and he's very young, and the sponsors set up a day where 4 or 5 of their footballers the sponsor was Adidas, in an old converted factory in Barcelona, whereby all of the players, and I think it was 5 or 6 of them, were in sort of little booths made up by a couple of plyboard walls and a curtain. And it was like going into a giant photo booth. And everybody, it wasn't a press conference, everybody got individual interviews. And I was sent there by the magazine 442. It was pre-packed with Adidas that I should have 25 minutes, half an hour with Leo Messi. No queue, no throng of photographers. And we went, and that was our first meeting. And I don't know which of us was more nervous. Probably me. But at that stage, although I knew I was dealing with somebody who'd ripped through the junior categories in Football Club Barcelona, and although I knew I was dealing with somebody who was projected to be special, it wasn't the same feeling as it would have been speaking to him 6 years later. Other times, well, like I told you about the Formula One racetrack, again, that was an Adidas event. Sometimes I was representing UEFA in the Champions League, and some of the post-match interviews came via them. There was one where I was involved with an American television program called 60 Minutes, where they wanted me to do the interview, and it was simultaneously translated into English as I did it. There was another one which I was invited to participate in for Sky Sports. Who else have I done it for? There have been times when Football Club Barcelona wanted him to speak, and it was arranged via the club. So there's a whole different range of ways in which I've been given the privilege of stopping and speaking to him. But in no case, unfortunately, was it Joanne, me phoning him up and saying, "Hey, Leo, you doing anything Friday? Let's have an hour. Let's have half an hour, and a turkey sandwich and a glass of milk." It's about being trusted as an individual, both by the player, his representatives, the club, and the media organisation that wants to get time with him, and then everybody finding the date. And that, across my career, is how it's been.
So I really didn't want to interrupt there because it was very interesting what you were saying. But I think Joanne was asking about Pep Guardiola.
Pep, sorry, Joanne. And then with Pep, that is a bigger and different story. The line dropped when Sean asked me the question. And I'm sorry.
Sorry about that.
Joanne, the first time I ever spoke to Pep Guardiola was in his office. And it's a deeply sad memory because outside his office was a little cubicle where the late Tito Villanova sat. So we had to pass by Tito, who I didn't know at that stage, but subsequently interviewed for my book about Barca. And he was a lovely man, a really warm, generous, kind man. So his loss was something that I felt very deeply. Into Pep's office, whereby no photographer was allowed. We sat and talked about football. It was prior to the 2009 Champions League final in Rome against Manchester United. Subsequent to that, there have been a whole host of different meetings. I've met him informally, excuse me, once in a restaurant, once at the golf club where we both play. In his off time in the summer, Pep will come up to a particular golf club, which is about 25 minutes drive outside Barcelona, and he'll play with his son. Last time I was there, he was playing a 4-ball with the Ronald Koeman and his boy. And I'm friends with Pep's brother, Pera, who works with our company, Duncan McMath's company, Zoom Sports International. So there's another little link. And UEFA have asked me to interview Pep Guardiola 2 or 3 times in sit-down interviews. I've enjoyed it. I know that he likes and respects my line of questioning. I know because he told me so. And therefore, it's a patchwork of opportunities, again, based on the fact that... So when Pep Guardiola participated in the film where I'd written the book and I was an executive producer, Take the Ball, Pass the Ball, at first when we asked him, Joanne, the answer was, I think, no, maybe 5 times. And he said, I'm not keen. It's for the players to speak about this era between 2008 and 2012. He was already at City at stage when we were making the movie with Universal Studios, and we needed to persuade him, and as carefully and as consistently as we tried to persuade him, it didn't work until we took his own phrase and played it back to him verbally and said, look, you told us this was the player's story. We've gone out and interviewed every single important footballer in your era at Barcelona, 2008 to 2012, not counting the B team year. They've all spoken. They've all spoken voluntarily, free of charge. We've had to coerce nobody. We've had to use favours with nobody. We've had to use a sponsor to persuade nobody. They've all said, yes, we will help tell this story. And then we said, now it's your turn. And he said, yes. Now, ultimately, that interview, the director of the movie, Duncan McMath, did. But to cap it, to finalise, Joanne, one of the things all of you will have noticed is that Pep has become much more accessible in England to media. When he began as a senior coach at Barcelona, after his year winning the title with Barca B, he took advice from Marcelo Bielsa, who said, never do sit-down interviews. If you do with one journalist, one newspaper, then the next paper will say, you did it with them, you have to do it with us. I personally think that was bad advice. I think that Pep's time in Barcelona became very wearing for him, very tiring for him, because he then gave, like Bielsa, very long press conferences, which were wonderful for us, because you genuinely could get access to this brilliant mind. But again, many in my profession used it to ask repetitive, dull, news-driven questions, which kind of drove him mad. I think in Germany it was a little bit different. The level of questions about football and strategy and tactics during a match and substitutions, I think, was slightly elevated compared to Spain. I think he enjoyed some of that. I think that initially he found it weird, the tradition in Bundesliga often for the two coaches to speak together post-match, which again tells you how football-based the culture is there, rather than looking for drama and headlines and anger and finger pointing by playing two coaches off against one another. They often sit together after a match in a press conference, and it doesn't happen all the time, but it was part of the culture there. I think it was an eye-opener. And at that stage, Pep Guardiola allowed the ex-Olympic athlete Marty Pernau to come and interview him about his training methods, his how he lived his life, what his aspirations were. And when he saw that in the book that Marty wrote and the company that I worked for, Backpage Press, translated and brought to England, I think gradually he became more open to one-on-one interviews. It's something that he's contracted to do by being in the Premier League with Manchester City. And I think if you watch, very often when Pep Guardiola gives Sky or BT their one-on-one interview, he can be cagey. Sometimes he can be irascible if he thinks the question is stupid, something I wholly approve of. I don't think we journalists get a free pass. I think it's on us, as you would say, to be intelligent and creative and responsible and respectful. And therefore, we are now in a phase where we're getting interaction with Pep Guardiola a great deal more. And I think he's becoming more accessible to fans and to the general public because of that. Whether he enjoys it or not, I don't know. And I think that I'll finish by saying it reached an absolute zenith, an absolute peak in the interview with Sky Sports, which I think was after the Tottenham Hotspur game, where he was asked about like the fact that they were losing the first half and winning the second half, and the journalist expected Pep to say, yes, losing is bad, winning is good, where Pep said, we were playing better when we were losing, and it's an anecdote that we won, but we didn't play as well in the second half. And by the way, and he went off on one about his players slacking off. I don't see them having the same hunger. The body language isn't good enough. I'm not happy with the standard of play. And where are the fans? Where are my fans? I don't want them to come with their arms folded. I want them to And if you haven't seen that interview, seek it out. Because it was a very direct message to the players, a very direct message to the fans. And his general message was, wake up. Help us compete. To the players particularly, it was like, you've dropped a level. He'd been giving them that message in private first, hinting at it in public, and then he let rip. So for my taste, that was one of the best Guardiola interviews that I've seen, and it was live, post-match, and it was very deliberate.
Yeah, it was very forthright, wasn't it? I think not something we're 100% used to in this country. Following up on that, Joan had another question. What do you make of Pep's impacts on the Premier League?
It's sensational. I can't speak highly enough of him. I grew up in a country whereby I always looked towards the European scene. I always believed that taking in wider ideas, taking in trying to get players to have devolved intelligence on the pitch. Now, I bet you I can't see everybody, Jay Marsetto, Mechlis, Tau, JCT, Maui, Madic, Marialista, Viking, Craig. I can't see all of you. I can't be sure that I'm the oldest person in this conversation, but I'm willing to bet that I am, including Sean and Josh. And I have to say that football in Britain was very much an army culture. The coach was a sergeant major. The players did what they were told. Now, some of that hasn't gone away, but Pep, along with others, have brought a culture where instead of ordering players, do this, do that, pass A, pass B, pass C, he's taught them, he's educated them, he's given them a means to understand why it is they're doing the very complicated things he asks them to do. And this is, for my taste, it's nothing to do with whether you do or don't adore Manchester City as a club or the way they play. But Pep Guardiola has posed questions to journalists, fans, players, physios, directors of football. Do you want to play this way? Do you understand playing this way? Do you think the way that City play is beautiful? Do you hate it? How do you defend against it? How do you attack against it? Why does he keep changing players' positions? These questions and the demonstration that with his methods, you can win league after league after league. With his methods, you can register the only 100-point season that there's been in the history of the Premier League. For my taste, Joan, I want, not just in football, but in life, I want people who challenge us, who educate us, who change us, and who stimulate antipathy in us too. You sometimes the people who make you know in life or art or in cinema or in sport, no, that's wrong. I'm not doing that. I'm reacting against that. I'm writing against that. Or if you're a defender or a coach or a director of football, we're not going down that route. I'm going to plan how to beat that route. All these things are good for us. So for my taste, Pep has elevated the debate, elevated the vocabulary. He's changed the way we watch things. It clearly, as every pioneer will find, there are people who just simply reject what you're proposing. And as long as you then come up with other theories and other ideas, fine. So for my taste, I feel we started on Messi. We're at Pep Guardiola. I genuinely feel enormously blessed that not just I've been involved and know these people, and I've had to test my vocabulary, test my ideas, expand my brain, expand my understanding. I think it's been a privilege for all of us to live in this football age.
Absolutely, yeah. Very, very interesting and insightful answer there. I was going to just say, Graham, I think I originally told you it would last around 45 minutes, the session. We have got some more fan questions if you're happy to.
Of course. No, listen, anybody who's tuned in and has sent in a question deserves an answer.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Well, it's from Josh himself. And
Is that his real surname?
I'm not 100% sure. We'll go with that. He has asked about a Barcelona connection about Gerard Piqué, and wants to get your views on what you thought of him retiring at the time when he did. I guess in not only in his career, but I know it was the World Cup break, but doing it mid-season as well. Did that strike you as strange or anything?
I've got really, really pungent views about this, Josh. I think that, well, first of all, I know Gerard Piqué pretty well. I've had some escapades with him. And while I don't share any of his tastes in owning a tennis competition or getting out and brokering sponsorship deals, not I'm particularly interested in esports. What I do understand is that he's an extraordinary restless mind. I think that he is, again, something that I'm not, maybe some of you are. He's a pure entrepreneur. And entrepreneurs, again, a little bit like Pep Guardiola, have visions, like risk. They see things in an angular way. They do not accept the common idea. They do not accept the status quo. And therefore, I'm quite happy being an observer of Gerard Piqué at this stage in his life rather than a participant. When I was a participant, again, I had his WhatsApp number. I could chat to him. I interviewed him many times. We ended up together with him having had a couple of drinks in the World Cup final office after the game when nobody would help him try to get the goal nets. I was the only person who said, "Come on, Gerard, I'll help you."
Oh,
we were right through the whole stadium in Soccer City. He was still in his boots with his metal studs, in his vest and the shorts, playing 120 minutes, winning, crying, drinking a couple of beers, and then infuriated by the fact that nobody would help him locate the goal net so that he could use his nail scissors pinched from the Spain Medics kit to clip, feet squared of net. Yeah. And we eventually located the nets in a box, in a brown cardboard box in the stadium manager's office. The stadium manager wasn't there. There was a guy in a rink, in a stupid old anorak there, a functionary, just a workie, who believed it was his job to protect those nets with his life. He told us they weren't there, pointed in the corner, said they're over there. And when we turned our backs, Gerard and I, he picked up the box, threw it in a cupboard, locked the door and swallowed the key. It was that idiotic. And when the guy was forced to take the nets out of the cupboard again, Gerard said to me in Spanish, so the guy couldn't understand, "I'll punch him. You grab the nets and we'll make a run for it." So this is who we're dealing with. But over the years, he changed a lot because business for him is something that he requires, not money, but he required to make sure that his hyperactive business brain was content, and therefore he continued to be not bored by professional football, which took him to the same stadiums, same challenges, the same test of mind and physique week in, week out. I understood that. And here's where my views get pungent. I absolutely and categorically disbelieve that Gerard Piqué should have been playing as little football as he did this season. There is no question that when he came into the team, there were one or two occasions when lack of match practice left him perhaps a touch short, notably the Inter game at home. But had he been playing pretty much every week at right centre-back, with either Koundé next to him or Araujo next to him, or better still, because Gerard Piqué, although right-footed, is perfectly content playing left centre-back, as Ramos was. I asked Ramos last week, just in private, not on mic, just tell me why you as a right foot or an ex-right full back consistently played left centre-back at Real Madrid, and now at Paris, you're either playing right centre-back or right of a three. And he said, listen, we were just, I said, was it about passing lines? Did you want to challenge us? He said, listen, we were a little bit left-sided, left-footed centre-backs. I volunteered and I kept the position. Simple as that. With Gerard, he could have played left centre-back instead of Eric Garcia doing that. And had he, before he quit, been playing 85%, 95% of the games, I think Barcelona would have been stronger in the Champions League. And Barcelona, at a time when young players were bedding in, would have had better leadership. And again, I categorically have no doubt at all that because of the perilous financial situation at Football Club Barcelona, the club authorities, and I'm going to set Xavi slightly aside from this, decided that if they could make him bored, that he would quit, and that would be massively helpful to them in financial fair play. He'd given an interview the previous April on, I don't even want to call them influencers, like these sprout up people who want to know nothing about football. However, he'd said in that interview, I'm not going to be a hindrance to Football Club Barcelona, and what's more, I'm not going to traipse around the country on the bench. They heard it. They said, here's the way to make him quit. They, in my opinion now, very firmly suggested to Xavi that Gerard Piqué wasn't used often. And therefore, what happened is that during the season, to quit like that became very useful to Football Club Barcelona because the board, and I think Joan Laporta, wanted him out. It did help them in terms of financial fair play. At the moment, defensively, in La Liga, as we speak, they've conceded 7 times. It's a remarkable figure. I think very rarely in Barcelona's history will they've conceded this few at the midpoint of a season. But they were conceding 2 a game in the Champions League. They've got a Europa League tie coming up against Manchester United. They could have done with a fully fit, fully athletic Gerard Piqué. Again, because he's a controversial figure, there's no escaping that. I think it's horrendous the way that his reputation, his legend, is disrespected. He has been a phenomenal footballer. He has been in the all-time top 20 Barcelona footballers ever. He's one of a tight group of people in the world, in football history, who've won a continental championship, a World Cup, and a continental championship again. No other country has done it other than Spain. And not everybody who won the title in 2008 at the Euro won in 2010 and 2012. Gerard Piqué did. His Champions League performances, particularly the one in Rome, where he prevented Cristiano Ronaldo scoring early on for Manchester United, was epic. This has been a gigantic football figure in Barcelona and in Spanish history. And I hated to see him going out like he did. But I don't think he's a guy, he didn't feel in any way as wounded as Leo Messi did. He took the decision himself. Leaders in the world tend to grasp a nettle. Alex Ferguson always said that one of the things that separated him from other managers was that when a problem came along, many of them had to put on their brown trousers and were fearful, and they prevaricated. Ferguson's assessment was that he looked at the problem, attacked it, grasped the nettle, made a decision, and accepted that this decision wouldn't always be right. But that if you leave it it gnaws away at you, it causes problems, it damages people's perception of you, and therefore, win, lose, or draw based on what happens after your decision, you have to be proactive. Gerard Piqué was, and not for the first time.
Yeah, it's very sad how it ended. You know, like you said, he was an absolute legend there. And based on what you said, I'm not going to press you for your thoughts on his relationship with Shakira. I think we'll leave that one.
I would advise you not to.
I think that's best. So we have another question from Celia, who is in the call here. She's appearing as Mejlis because it's a name backwards and then her first initial. So fun fact there. But she's asking.
I like it. I like it.
It's
Nice
cool.
one.
It's cool. She's asking, what is the most memorable football match you've been involved in covering through your career?
It's such a difficult question to pick one, but one that instantly always comes to my mind would be that at World Cup 2006, I'd been asked to begin covering Spain. They were eliminated. I was allowed a choice about whose progress I would follow then, and I opted to follow. This means that training camp, press conference, and matches, both Brazil and Italy. Meaning that by the semi-final, it was Italy, and the semi-final in Dortmund, where we went to Signal Iduna Park, a place where Germany had never lost an international, competitive international. This home team, coached by Klinsmann with Jogi Löw at his side, had not been expected to be as powerful as they were. Yet the momentum had taken them to the World Cup semi-final. It was a place where the stadium is huge. The culture of massive, noisy, rabid love for either Dortmund themselves or the national team, the Mannschaft, if it comes there, was felt to be an element which would tip the balance in their way. Italy had come to the championship with Marcello Lippi in charge, but off the back of the very, very difficult, years of match fixing and relegation.
Yeah.
And they came to this World Cup probably not fancied to win. And across my life, not recently at that tournament, but across my life, they had been the authors of Catenaccio, of ultra defending, and I had in 1994-5 at the Christmas period, I'd gone over twice to Juventus on study trips, whereby I'd been given access to the training, to their gym routines, and a sit-down lunchtime interview at the training ground with Marcello Lippi, and I was accompanied by the late Celtic manager Tommy Burns with a translator, and Lippi was setting out the formation and the ideas, and this was in January, that he would use in 2 months' time to play Real Madrid in the Champions League quarter-final. And this is the year that Juventus go on to win it. And in the course of this conversation, Marcello Lippi had explained to me that when he was a libero at Sampdoria, which was in the days of 5 men at the back, and the free man, in theory, was the guy who sat not in front of the four defenders, but behind the four defenders as an extra padlock. And the 5-man defences were not about wing backs then. They were about having 5 men and the goalkeeper to defend at all times. And he was told at Samp that if he ever got within, 30 metres of the halfway line in his own half, he'd be fined and dropped. Defence was absolute.
Yeah.
And Lippi explained to me that day that he took a decision that if he was ever a coach, attack would be his philosophy. And he's not the inventor of it, because clearly in the days when I began playing football, there were 5 attackers, 2 wingers, an inside right, an inside left, and a centre forward. So it's not that Lippi was the first to attack, but he reintroduced the idea of 3 men up front that had been used by Ajax in the 70s. And in the 90s, Lippi was hailed as a anarchist risk taker for playing Padovano, Vialli, and Lombardo up front in a 3 and pressing in a trident. And to be at that game, when I probably won't be able to, Celia, I probably won't be able to name them all right now, but On the pitch, he had Totti, Luca Toni, Del Piero, Gilardino. I don't know who. I think he had 5 attacking players on the pitch in the second period of extra time in Germany's fortress in a World Cup semi-final. And watching it, I knew I was watching somebody, one man, saying, "I defy history. I defy tradition. I will not be jailed by the ideas of others." There you are. There's another striker. There's another striker. And clearly what it offered was a chance for Germany to attack and rip into a midfield which was largely been controlled, I think, by Gattuso. There was one more midfielder who's Camoranesi was working his socks off, and Cannavaro was playing for 3 men. And if you think about the goals that Del Piero and Grosso scored, 2 utterly sensationally beautiful goals,
Definitely,
to win that game, the noise, the repercussions of Italy back in a World Cup final for the first time since 1994, and before that 1982. I could easily name for you Barcelona games like the final in Rome against Manchester United, where a treble was completed. The second time I'd been at a treble-winning Champions League match, 1999 in the Camp Nou, where I was a reporter for a newspaper who had to write a 1,000-word match report across 2 pages, and you had to send your match report in finished 15 minutes before the end of the match. At which point, Bayern Munich had ruined Manchester United's treble. Bayern Munich were on course for another treble, their own, because they did win the league, had already won the league. They would go on to win the cup, and if they'd won that Champions League, they were the ones with the treble chance left. Manchester United season not ruined, but the chance of a treble ruined. You send your copy, you're sitting waiting for the final whistle, not praying that nothing happens, because I wanted the ex-Aberdeen manager Alex Ferguson to win the treble. Then what happens. 2 goals in a couple of seconds in added times. You got the whole newspaper in London is waiting to be, the whole newspaper is waiting to be printed. You got a frantic phone call from the desk saying, "Write us 400 words to put on the top of that in 3.5 minutes. Try it one time if you want. Try and write 400 words of pure gibberish in 3.5, 4 minutes if you want to. See how easy that is." We're ripping out the headlines and the pictures, and somehow I managed it. It went in. The first report, the first printed report in the first edition of the newspaper was good. So good that it reached Barcelona Airport the next morning. The head of Sky Sports was leaving to fly back after the Champions League treble. United won, to fly back to England. He went to the airport. He picked up the paper I worked for, expecting the deadlines to mean that it read Bayern Munich win 1-0. He picked it up, he read it, and later that summer, when I was at dinner with him, he said it was one of the proudest things I've ever seen in my time in British journalism. And as a result of it, he offered me a job while I was here in Spain, and it helped me be on television in Vista de la Liga. It helped me make it worthwhile staying in Spain because of that match, because of that night, because of how I reacted to it. So I could name you many, many matches where the professional responsibility of working there has felt gigantic, and I felt happy and tested and stunned as a football fan in equal measures. But for some reason, the first match that came into my head when you mentioned it was that World Cup semi-final in 2006.
Yeah, that was amazing. I mean, there's that very famous YouTube video of the Italian commentator for the second goal. I remember watching that at home, so I think that's a very good choice there. I think we've had pretty much all our user questions. So just to end, Graham, if you will, who's winning La Liga this season?
I don't know. I'm used to speaking in capital letters and making bold predictions. And if you want me to guess, I think I'll probably say I don't know. I think that Barcelona are increasingly equipped to do it. I don't think the 5-point margin as we speak is significant enough to say they will win it. I thoroughly believe Carlo Ancelotti that the physical work that Antonio Pintus, their fitness coach, imposed on them after the return from the World Cup initially, and they knew this, did them damage. They knew that was part of the package. and that now they are in a very, very good shape. I think that they're equipped to knock Liverpool out of the Champions League. I think that it might emerge that the Champions League becomes a very, very big goal for Real Madrid. I think that each of the teams is in a slightly delicate stage. That there are 2 or 3 key players in either camp who, if they are injured significantly, that almost wipes out the chance of winning the title. I would say that Koundé and Araujo and Ter Stegen for Barcelona are absolute key footballers. And I would say that Benzema, Courtois, and perhaps Militao, if we were to see significant absences from them, you would write off them and his chances of winning the title. But I genuinely believe the 5 gap is not ultra significant, and I do think Madrid are on the rise. I think that they are neck and neck. It might be Barcelona by a whisker, but I think that even if we're not seeing the absolute highest quality title race in the 21 years I've been here, I think we might see the most dramatic one.
Well, there you go. That's a very intriguing prospect. Thank you very much for that, Graham. And a huge thank you for joining us today. It's been really interesting.
A pleasure. Thanks to everybody who listened, and thanks to everybody who sent in questions.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you very much for that, guys. And if you did join late, we'll get the audio up as soon as possible. But absolutely massive thank you to you again, Graham, for joining us. Thank you, everyone who listened, and we'll see you at the next one. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Adios.